The courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter, a typical day, until she walked in. A black woman, her head freshly shaved, her eyes burning with quiet defiance, entered in a simple dress. The bailiff, a white man with a smug grin, didn't even look up. Just another defendant, he assumed. Another one to mock, to control. What he didn't realize? The woman he'd humiliated just days ago, forcing her to shave her hair under the guise of courtroom decorum, wasn't here to plead for mercy. She was here to deliver justice. Seconds later, the courtroom doors swung open again. "Everyone, rise," the clerk announced. The bailiff's smirk faltered, his face drained of color. Because the woman he thought was beneath him, she was now wearing the robe, and she was about to sentence more than just criminals. She was about to sentence the system. The early morning air in downtown Montgomery carried a sticky humidity that clung to everything. In front of the Montgomery County Courthouse, the American flag flapped lazily above the polished marble entrance. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed faintly above the security checkpoint, where a woman stood alone, her hands folded behind her back, posture straight despite the unease in her chest. Her name was Serena Miles, a 36-year-old African-American veteran, a retired Marine, honorably discharged after 3 tours. She didn't walk like a civilian. Her every step was purposeful, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. But today she wore a long hoodie, not a uniform. And under that hoodie was a secret she was hiding with everything in her. She stepped forward, pulled down her hood for the security screening, and immediately noticed the shift. The older white bailiff, badge reading S. Clarkson, raised his eyebrows. Then came the smirk. "You planning to join a monastery, girl?" He chuckled, nodding at her shaved head. Serena didn't flinch. She'd been through worse. Boot camp insults, enemy fire, the death of comrades. But this was personal. It wasn't just about her appearance. It was about the power people like Clarkson thought they had over women like her, over black people, over anyone who didn't fit into their narrow vision of dignity and worth. The courtroom she was summoned to was small, filled with the sounds of shuffling papers and murmured legal arguments. Serena sat quietly in the back row, waiting for her pro bono legal advocate to arrive. She wasn't the defendant. She was a key witness in a case involving a corrupt city contractor, but the bailiff didn't care to learn that. Minutes passed. Then Bailiff Clarkson reappeared. "Hey, you!" he barked, pointing directly at Serena. She looked up slowly, not surprised. "You can't be in here with your head like that. It's against decorum," he said smugly, as if he'd caught her committing a crime. "You need to leave or cover that up." Serena's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "I said—" He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a poisonous whisper. "Either wear a wig or get out. This court has standards. Don't want folks thinking we let just anybody in here." The words hit harder than a boot to the gut. Serena could have told him about the countless lives she'd saved, the IEDs she'd disarmed, the days she spent in blinding desert heat protecting the very rights he was trampling. But she didn't. She simply stood up. "If you insist," she said calmly. But the damage was done. That night, Serena went home and stared at herself in the mirror. Her buzzed head wasn't a choice. It was a side effect of recent medical treatment she'd been undergoing. Treatment she'd been quietly enduring with grace and solitude. She had planned to wear a head wrap to the courtroom, but forgot it in her rush. And for that, she'd been mocked, humiliated. Her phone vibrated with a message from her advocate. "Hearing moved to Monday. You'll be back in that court." Serena's eyes didn't blink as she stared into her reflection. "No," she whispered. "I won't be in that court." She turned away from the mirror. "I'll be presiding over it." Monday arrived draped in gray clouds, but Serena Miles walked into the courthouse as if the sun shined only for her. There was no hoodie this time, no attempt to hide, Her buzzed scalp was bare, her expression composed. She wore a crisp black suit, tailored just right, and a leather satchel rested on her shoulder. Inside the courthouse lobby, everything looked the same. Same peeling posters, same vending machine that hadn't worked in months, and yes, same smug bailiff leaning on the security desk like he owned the place. Bailiff Clarkson narrowed his eyes at Serena as she approached. "Oh, it's you again," he muttered, standing up straight. "Didn't get the message last time, huh?" She didn't answer. Just walked past him with that same military precision. Shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes forward. "You deaf too?" he barked. "I said—" But another voice cut through the lobby. "Good morning, Judge Miles. Courtroom 3 is prepped for you." Clarkson froze. Serena turned slightly, enough to let him see the smirk tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said to the clerk. "Let's begin." The bailiff's mouth hung open, eyes darting between Serena and the clerk, as if trying to solve a riddle. But it wasn't a riddle. It was a reckoning. Because Serena Miles wasn't just a veteran. She wasn't just a witness. She was a newly appointed circuit judge, confirmed quietly just last week and scheduled to preside over her very first session this Monday morning. The hearing she'd attended days ago was as a legal observer, getting a sense of the caseloads and atmosphere. What she hadn't expected was to experience the very rot she'd been brought in to clean. Now every inch of the courthouse that once tried to shrink her seemed to echo her power. In courtroom 3, Serena took her place behind the bench with quiet dignity. The robe they gave her felt heavy on her shoulders, but not from fear, from the weight of justice long overdue. She looked out at the courtroom filling with people, defendants, attorneys, clerks, each unaware that they were about to witness history, but not Clarkson, not him. He lingered near the doorway, visibly pale, trying to process it all. When the clerk banged the gavel and announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Serena Miles," the room stood, except Clarkson. He just stared. Then slowly he stood too. His eyes avoided hers as she met his gaze directly for the first time. "Mr. Clarkson," she said, voice calm but sharp as a blade, "please step forward." He obeyed. He had to. The courtroom fell still. "Last Thursday," she began, "you approached a woman in this courthouse and made derogatory comments regarding her appearance. You violated her dignity and the dignity of this institution. You believed her to be beneath you. You were wrong." Clarkson shifted. His throat bobbed. The blood drained from his face. "That woman," Serena continued, "was me. And your behavior was not only unprofessional, it was discriminatory. I have filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. Effective immediately, you are relieved of bailiff duties pending investigation." Gas rippled through the courtroom. Clarkson's voice cracked. "You can't do that." "I just did," she said, unmoved. Two deputies approached him. He backed away instinctively, then caught himself. His power, his arrogance, it all slipped through his fingers like sand. After the hearing, Serena sat alone in chambers for a moment, letting the silence settle around her. She thought of all the black women like her who had been silenced, minimized, degraded in rooms where they had every right to stand tall. She thought of the Marines she served with who'd never doubted her strength, only to return home to a world where that strength was questioned every day. There was a soft knock on the door. Her clerk entered, beaming. "Judge Miles, I've never seen anyone handle that like you just did." That was powerful. Serena looked up, eyes clear. "I didn't come here to make a scene, but I also didn't come here to shrink." The clerk nodded. "We've needed someone like you for a long time." Serena looked down at her empty legal pad, then back out toward the window. "No," she said softly. "You've needed someone like you. You just needed to see it could be done." Serena had returned to her chambers after court adjourned, but the fire inside her didn't dim. The hearing had gone as expected. smooth, efficient, powerful, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. That courtroom wasn't just a place for verdicts. It was a battlefield for justice. And Serena knew too well how many people had been crushed under the weight of institutional disrespect without ever stepping behind the bench. She removed her robe carefully, folding it with the same care she used to fold her military fatigues years ago. Her eyes lingered on the nameplate freshly mounted on her desk. Judge Serena Miles. It still didn't feel real, not entirely, because behind that title, there was still the girl who grew up in foster care, who enlisted at 17 to escape a broken system, and who fought for every inch of respect she'd ever received. And yet, even now, even with all the degrees, honors, and medals, someone like Clarkson could look at her and see only one thing: a black woman he thought he could humiliate. Serena sat down, staring out of the tall window of her chambers. Rain started tapping the glass, soft and rhythmic, pulling her back into memory. It was Boot Camp, South Carolina, 2005. She was the only black woman in her unit and one of the few females overall. The men were relentless, staring, mocking, questioning her strength, her intelligence, her presence. One night during a brutal night drill, one of the sergeants barked at her, "Your hair's too much of a distraction, Miles. Fix it or lose it." The next day, she stood in front of the mirror, electric clippers in hand. Tears welled in her eyes, not from the act of shaving her head, but from the knowledge that it wasn't about hair. It was about erasure, about conforming, about forcing her to strip away identity to make others comfortable. But even then, something in her shifted. That shaved head became her shield. She wore it with defiance, walking straighter, speaking louder, challenging harder. She turned their insult into her weapon. The military didn't change her. It revealed her. Now, years later, the courthouse had tried to repeat history. Clarkson had reached across time to that young recruit in front of the mirror and tried to humiliate her again. But she wasn't that recruit anymore. She was the one with the gavel now. A knock on her door broke her from the memory. It was Chief Judge Hanley, the man who had mentored her during her application. A tall, stoic man in his 60s, white and old school, but fair. Serena stood up instinctively. "Relax, Miles," he said, stepping inside. "I just came to talk." He looked at her for a moment, letting the silence sit. "I heard about the bailiff," he said finally. Serena's jaw tightened. "He humiliated me in front of an entire courtroom. I wasn't going to let that rot stay beneath the surface." Hanley nodded slowly, then pulled a chair. "You did the right thing." That surprised her. "You know," he added, "when you were first nominated, I had my doubts." Serena raised an eyebrow. "Not because you weren't qualified. God knows you're more qualified than most of us ever were. But because I knew this courthouse. I knew the kinds of men who walk these halls. I thought they might try to tear you down." "They tried," she replied quietly. "But you didn't break." Serena looked away. "It's not about me. It's about the message. If someone like me, decorated veteran, law degree, spotless record, can still be treated like a criminal because of my skin or hair, what does that say for the woman coming here for a custody battle? Or the young boy fighting a possession charge? Who speaks for them?" Hanley leaned back. "Maybe you do." Later that afternoon, Serena called a staff meeting. Every bailiff, clerk, and junior judge was in attendance. Some still whispered about what happened that morning. Others stared at her, measuring her presence, trying to guess what kind of judge she would be. She stood before them, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a leader. "I won't tolerate racism, sexism, or any form of disrespect in my courtroom," she said, her voice resonating through the chamber. "Not toward me, not toward our visitors, not toward each other." She paused, then looked directly at a few faces that seemed to squirm. This bench isn't a throne. It's a responsibility. Every person who steps into this courthouse deserves to be seen, heard, and treated like they matter. I'll lead by that standard, and I expect you all to follow it." Someone clapped, then another, and soon the chamber filled with applause. Not all joined in, but Serena didn't need everyone. She just needed the truth to echo loud enough to drown out silence. When the meeting ended, a young Latina clerk named Elena approached her privately. She was new, barely 3 months in, and clearly nervous. "Judge Miles," she said softly, "thank you for what you did." Serena smiled. "You okay?" Elena hesitated. "Last week, the same bailiff told me to speak real English when I was on the phone with my mom. I didn't report it. I thought maybe it wasn't a big deal." Serena reached out and gently placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "It's always a big deal." Elena's eyes glistened. "Thank you for showing us it's okay to speak up." As the young woman walked away, Serena realized something. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about culture, about changing the invisible rules that allowed people like Clarkson to operate unchecked. She wasn't just writing verdicts. She was rewriting the rules. By the next morning, Serena's court chambers were buzzing, not with rumors, but with movement. She had filed a formal complaint against Bailiff Clarkson and demanded a full internal review of his actions, not only the incident involving herself, but also previous complaints that may have been dismissed or buried. And sure enough, as expected, the deeper they dug, the uglier it got. The HR department uncovered 3 past reports filed anonymously, 2 from young black women who had worked as interns, and 1 from a defendant's attorney. All 3 accused Clarkson of inappropriate conduct, racial slurs, and demeaning comments. The reports had somehow vanished from official records, marked as resolved internally without any follow-up. Serena wasn't surprised. Clarkson had been in the system for over 2 decades, a fixture of the courthouse. To some, he was just old school. To others, he was a walking time bomb that nobody dared confront, until now. Serena met with the ethics committee in a private session. The energy was tense. Several of the senior judges looked uncomfortable, white men who had long turned a blind eye. They shifted in their seats as Serena laid out every detail, not just of her personal experience, but of the silent system that had protected him. "He didn't just disrespect me," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "He disrespected the authority of this court, the dignity of our office, and the integrity we claim to uphold." One of the older judges, a conservative former prosecutor named Judge Riley, tried to challenge her. "With all due respect, Judge Miles, shaving your head doesn't seem like grounds for a full-blown ethics war." She turned her gaze toward him, unwavering. "It wasn't just a haircut. It was an act of domination, of public humiliation, of telling me and everyone watching that I don't belong here, that I need to be put in place. And he did it not to a random civilian. He did it to a sitting judge." The room fell silent. Then finally, Chief Judge Hanley, who had watched quietly until now, spoke. "I believe Judge Miles has presented sufficient grounds for an internal disciplinary trial, and I support a temporary suspension of Bailiff Clarkson pending the outcome." Votes were cast. Eyes avoided hers. But the motion passed. Clarkson was escorted out of the courthouse later that day, not by force, but with the quiet shame of a man realizing the walls were finally closing in. He tried to look indifferent as he was handed his suspension letter, but Serena saw the twitch in his jaw, the glint of panic. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Justice was moving. A week later, Serena was invited to speak at a citywide legal conference. The event had been booked months in advance, but her recent headline-grabbing confrontation had turned her into something of a reluctant icon. As she stepped onto the stage in front of hundreds of law professionals, reporters, and students. She knew the room was waiting to hear how she would frame it. Would she speak with grace, with fire, with vengeance? She gave them none of that. Instead, she gave them truth. I didn't become a judge for revenge, she said. I became a judge because I believe in justice. But let me be clear, justice is not passive. It doesn't sit quietly in polished robes. It speaks, it moves, it corrects, and sometimes it confronts. She paused, letting the words settle. We have a disease in our institutions, not just racism, but the silence that lets it fester. And that silence is a choice that has cost people their dignity, their careers, and in some cases, their lives. I refuse to be silent. Thunderous applause followed. Some people stood, others didn't, but Serena hadn't come for applause. She came to send a message. To every courtroom, every officer, every unseen worker pushing papers behind the scenes. A new standard had arrived. Later that night, Serena received a handwritten letter slid under her chamber door. It read, Dear Judge Miles, my daughter was in your courtroom the day that bailiff humiliated you. She's only 12. She'd never seen a judge that looked like her before, and she'd never seen someone stand so strong, so calm, so proud, even when disrespected. She came home and told me, Mom, I want to be like her. Thank you for not backing down. A mother you've never met, Serena, clutched the letter to her chest. That was it. That was why. Not for headlines, not for retaliation, but for that girl, for every girl. Because courage isn't loud. It's not flashy. It's quiet, steady, and rooted in truth. And in that moment, she knew this battle was worth it. The internal investigation into Bailiff Clarkson's conduct was in full motion. What had begun as a single report from Judge Serena Miles soon unraveled into a pattern of systemic abuse, all pointing to a truth many within the court already knew, but refused to acknowledge. Clarkson had been protected, tolerated, and even silently enabled for years. But now silence was no longer an option. Witnesses came forward in waves. Court interns, paralegals, even other bailiffs, black, brown, and female, recounted experiences of being mocked, dismissed, and mistreated. A Latina intern described how Clarkson had once told her she better know how to make good coffee if she ever wanted to make it in law. A young black male attorney revealed how Clarkson would call him son and refuse to pass his documents directly, placing them instead on a table like he was unworthy of touch. Even courtroom footage showed a disturbing consistency. Clarkson speaking respectfully to white attorneys and defendants while routinely raising his voice at others. The District Ethics Board, once hesitant, now had no choice. Clarkson's behavior was more than inappropriate. It was unethical, corrosive, and prejudicial. A formal hearing was announced, not internal, not private. This time, it would be public. And guess who would preside? Judge Serena Miles. The announcement made waves across media outlets. Some questioned the choice, claiming bias. Others called it poetic justice. But Serena remained poised. She wouldn't let revenge dictate her. She would let justice speak for itself. The hearing began in a packed courtroom. Reporters filled the back row, and every legal bench was occupied. There was no doubt this case was symbolic. It wasn't just Clarkson on trial. It was the system that had allowed him to thrive unchecked. Serena entered the courtroom not with flair, but with authority. She wore her robe with grace, her head shaved smooth and proud. Her presence was undeniable. Clarkson, now stripped of his badge and uniform, sat at the defendant's table. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. The sneer he once wore was gone. In its place, a hollow defensiveness. The prosecution laid out the evidence, sworn testimonies, camera footage, Timelines of complaints ignored or resolved quietly. One by one, people took the stand. Their voices didn't shake, they roared. Clarkson's defense attorney tried to play the old school card. He argued that Clarkson was from a different time, that he meant no harm, that perhaps he lacked proper training on evolving workplace standards. But Serena's gaze didn't waver. Racism is not a generational quirk, she said during closing arguments. It is a poison, and anyone who administers it in a courtroom where fairness must reign must be held accountable. The verdict was swift: guilty of professional misconduct, guilty of repeated discriminatory behavior, permanent dismissal from court services, and as Clarkson was escorted out, not by a fellow bailiff, but by courthouse security, he looked back at Serena, this time not with arrogance, but with disbelief. How had the woman he tried to humiliate become the judge of his fate? Because justice, when given a voice, always finds its way back to the source. In the weeks that followed, Serena became more than just a judge. She became a beacon. Law schools invited her to speak. Black legal organizations reached out, offering awards, mentorship opportunities, and collaborations. Her inbox overflowed with messages of support, some from strangers, others from silent allies who were finally finding their courage. But it wasn't the praise that moved her, it was the change. The courthouse implemented mandatory diversity and conduct training. A third-party ombudsman was brought in to ensure all future complaints would be handled transparently. Internships were redesigned to protect students from abuse. A new internal policy required multiple personnel reviews for all court officers and bailiffs every 6 months. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And as Serena sat in her chambers weeks later, flipping through a law school newsletter, she smiled at a small headline tucked in the corner. First-year student inspired by Judge Miles starts initiative for women of color in law. That was it. That was why she fought. Then, on a quiet Friday afternoon, a knock echoed on her chamber door. Her assistant peeked in. "There's someone here to see you," she said softly. "She says she used to be stationed with you." Serena's heart skipped. "Send her in." In walked Staff Sergeant Lana Brooks, her old comrade from the Marine base in Okinawa. They hadn't seen each other in over a decade. Lana saluted, grinning. "Permission to hug, ma'am?" Serena laughed and opened her arms. The embrace was tight, years of shared grit between them. "I saw the news," Lana said, eyes misting. "You stood up like we always talked about. You didn't just fight the system. You changed it." Serena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It was time." Lana glanced at the gavel resting on her desk. "Still can't believe you went from camo boots to the bench." Serena smiled. "Turns out, justice wears both." Months had passed since the verdict. Judge Serena Miles had become a symbol not only of justice, but of transformation. Proof that resilience and dignity could shatter even the strongest chains of prejudice. Her courtroom had become a space of fairness, where every voice mattered and no one was diminished by the color of their skin, their gender, or their history. But the most powerful moment wasn't in a speech or in a headline. It came one quiet morning when a young black girl sat nervously in the courtroom gallery. Her name was Tiana West, a high school senior shadowing professionals for a school assignment. Her counselor had suggested she visit the courthouse. What she didn't expect was to find a judge who looked like her. During a recess, Serena stepped down from the bench and walked toward the gallery. She noticed the girl's eyes following her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. With a gentle smile, Serena extended her hand. "You thinking about law?" she asked. Tiana nodded shyly. "I didn't think we could be judges until today." Serena knelt beside her and whispered, "You don't just belong in this room, Tiana. You belong at the head of it." That single sentence lit something inside Tiana, a fire that Serena recognized. It was the same flame she carried as a young woman in the military, the same fire that refused to be extinguished even when someone like Clarkson tried to shame her in front of a courtroom. Serena had taken a brutal moment, her humiliation at the hands of a racist bailiff, and transformed it into a force of good, not by screaming or seeking revenge, but by rising. She didn't destroy Clarkson with hate. She dismantled his power with integrity. A week later, Serena received a letter on her desk, handwritten. It read, "Dear Judge Miles, I used to think I had to shrink to survive. But after watching you, I realized I can stand tall, speak loud, and take up space. Thank you for reminding me that power doesn't come from a badge or a robe. It comes from knowing who you are." Tiana Serena folded the letter and placed it gently in her journal. She'd keep it there as a reminder of what it meant to rise from humiliation, to lead with grace, and to inspire with truth. Outside her window, the American flag swayed gently in the wind. And in that moment, Serena didn't just feel like a judge. She felt like a movement. Have you ever witnessed someone turn injustice into lasting change? What did they do, and how did it inspire you? What would you have done in Serena's position? Confronted the system from within or walked away? Why? If you felt empowered by Serena's journey, don't forget to subscribe to the Arc of Stories for more powerful, true tales of courage and transformation. Your voice, your perspective, it matters.